British Columbians, are you feeling unsettled about our last election? From mysterious uncounted ballots turning up, procedural violations, contentious phone votes, and even allegations that an advisor to the recently recrowned Premier David Eby could be entangled in a communist China linked network seeking to undermine elections. It's clear. It's time for answers. That's why I've set up a quick and easy way for you to join me in doing something about this at bcelectionintegrity.com, where in just seconds you can email all of BC's elected parties, the chief electoral officer, and the BC ombudsperson to demand an independent review into Elections BC's handling of BC's 43rd general election and any potential foreign interference threats to it. And of course, that's also why we need your help by donating what you can when you're at that site to help us cover the costs for me to apply journalistic pressure to ensure they take action. Drea Humphrey here with Rebel News, the BC Bureau Chief Reporter, and boy, what an election we just had. As swearing-in ceremonies wrap up in the legislature following a neck-and-neck race where David Eby's NDP secured a majority win with the minimum seats required, and the now official opposition BC Conservatives led by John Rusted standing just 3 seats shy of the same support. Many of you have let me know you're still hesitant to trust the process and integrity behind the election in the first place. Now, if I were a legacy media journalist, and thank God I'm not, I'd probably be gaslighting you and the rest of the public into thinking such concerns are just another dim-witted conspiracy theory, like this Czech news journalist, Mo Amir, who equated folks recognizing the significant distrust in this area as people likely to be experiencing brain rot from being on X too much. Or like this North Shore news editorial entitled Attacks Against Election BC Reveal the Crisis in Conservatism, which says we are appalled by the online conspiracy theories alleging this carefully legislated, nonpartisan process is an attempt by the NDP to steal the election. Now, based on my reports, digging into the handling of this election, I admit that at this time asserting that the NDP stole the election is quite the stretch. But questioning whether or not the elections legislation was actually as carefully legislated as it ought to have been, and whether or not Elections BC, nonpartisan or not, executed a competent election is no conspiracy. At this point, it's a must. And here's why. Many of you now know that weeks after the election, Elections BC admitted they discovered they failed to count an entire 891 ballot box in the Prince George Mackenzie electoral district. And also that in Surrey-Guildford, the province's most hotly contested race, poof, just like that, another 28 unreported votes showed up after a final count had narrowly flipped the BC Conservative candidate's lead over the NDP by a mere 27 votes. And then after the missed 28 vote discovery was counted, it knocked the NDP's Peter Begg's lead to 21 votes. And then, after a judicial count was conducted, it bumped Begg's decisive lead back to 22 votes. It's hard to keep track before an election, should it be? Oh, and let's not forget the sweeping changes we saw rolled out during the election that were legislated back in 2019 under the oversight of then Attorney General David Eby. Amendments that even the BC government acknowledges were the most significant changes to BC's voting process in over 25 years. Changes that paved the way for the provincial election's first-time use of electronic voting books to check voter information and phone voting, where it's literally impossible for election officials to compare a voter's face to their ID. And amendments that also replaced human counts with Dominion voting tabulators. While my reports on this so far show that at least for the random after-vote checks on only a small portion of the overall tabulators used and for which scrutineers were permitted to be present, the counts appear to match. Elections BC, on the other hand, or though, has admitted to me that at no point do they verify the tabulator's source code, which would allow officials to confirm that the tabulators are accurately and securely recording votes internally and that they are free from hidden errors and vulnerabilities. The election mishaps we are aware of so far include election officials apparently violating procedures for how they reported out of district results in at least 5 ridings, resulting in a string of additional voting discrepancies in close to 70 ridings, to the point that EBC's chief electoral officer, Anton Bogman, issued a rare non apologetic statement to order corrections to the results. But it's all right, because Elections B.C. Chief Electoral Officer Anton Bogman came out with an unapologetic statement about some of this, including the following excuses.
These mistakes were a result of human error. Our elections rely on the work of over 17,000 election officials from communities across the province. Election officials were working 14 hours or more on voting days, and on final voting day in particular, faced extremely challenging weather conditions in many parts of the province. These conditions likely contributed to these mistakes.
Blame it on the weather. Oh, and of course, don't forget to just trust the process, kind of like how you should always trust the science, even though both scientific findings and the management of a tax-funded agency handling our election should never be above scrutiny, especially when the intent of that scrutiny is to verify whether or not error correction, method improvements, and more transparency is needed. Perhaps that's why Mr. Rustad, while conceding to the election's results and commending Elections BC staff for their hard work during the election, is also calling for this.
We need to have an independent review. I mean, I know that Elections BC is doing the best they can, and I don't want to undermine the confidence of the people of British Columbia in our electoral system. But when you have an election that is this tight and you have boxes of ballots that were misplaced or that were not counted, it does bring into question sort of what has gone on and what else could potentially be there. And I think the only way to make sure that we can restore complete confidence in our electoral system is an independent review to look at everything from the legislation right through to how ballots are counted, through to how Elections BC have handled the whole election process.
In contrast, BC Premier David Eby, who stands by the election, is proposing that an all-party committee handle the investigation into the election errors, adding that he looks forward to working with all MLAs to uphold our shared commitment to free and fair elections, the foundation of our democracy. So what do you think? Do you think British Columbians deserve a government-run probe, even though some of what's being looked at is the government's reasons for making the amendments of concern? Or do you think, and agree with me, that enough is enough, and that British Columbians need a truly independent review diving into what really took place during our 43rd general election so that we can get answers and protect future elections? If so, go to bcelectionintegrity.com, demand an independent review of our election, because it's not about politics, it's about democracy. Go to bcelectionintegrity.com and sign and share our call to action. And you can also catch up on our latest BC election reports. And if you're able to, please donate what you can toward my ongoing investigative coverage of this election.